Governor Gavin Newsom, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be back with you.
It is wonderful to have you here. I want to start off by talking about the problems facing the Democratic Party right now. Democrats are out of power in Washington. Republicans control the White House and both chambers of Congress. Democrats have been described as lost in the wilderness. Do you believe the Democratic brand is damaged right now?
Not right now. 4 months ago, if you asked me that question, I would have been struggling to find positive signs of the party. I feel it's a completely different moment. I feel like we're on the precipice of a remarkable moment on November 4th. And not only where I'm confident we're going to win here with Proposition 50, but you're going to have two new remarkable governors in Virginia and New Jersey. You're going to have a dynamic young mayor, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, that ran an extraordinary and exceptional campaign that galvanized people that frankly have been disenfranchised from politics. And we've got leaders now that have a united front and a message that's breaking through on healthcare with Schumer's and Jeffries that give me real confidence that the Democratic Party is on its ascendancy, and November 4th will be a pivotal moment marking a new frame, new energy for our party. We're
going to talk about each of those issues that you just mentioned, but it sounds like you're predicting a big night for Democrats on November 4th.
Yeah, I am, and for obvious reasons. I mean, this is a historically unpopular president. His policies are even more unpopular than the president himself. In every core category, he's underwater, and he's a guy who promised to make us wealthier and healthier. We're poorer and sicker. Across the board, people are starting to realize that not only is our coffee more expensive, their beef is more expensive, but the cost of an automobile is more expensive. Since he became president, the cost of utilities, all the things he promised to solve day one, he hasn't solved. So his recklessness aside, his style aside, the substance he hasn't delivered. And that's why, again, we're here, Prop 50, because he knows he's going to lose the midterms and he's trying to rig the election before one vote is cast.
You acknowledge, though, that Democrats still have a significant amount of rebuilding to do. What specifically do you think Democrats have to do in order to be a viable party again in the midterms in the next presidential election?
Win. People want to see what winners matters, momentum, strength, not weakness. I think the one thing that's marked the Democratic Party in the last number of months, you get shellacked in election. When you lose the electoral vote, the popular vote, we lost both houses of Congress, and we were in doubt. There was anxiety. I mean, who are we as a party? There was concern about our ability to lead at this remarkable moment, the shock and awe coming from Donald Trump. We were on our heels. We weren't on our toes. And so I think people want strength. They want clarity. They want conviction. And then we could talk about a positive alternative message. Obviously, Trump and Trumpism in the situational crisis that's at hand for our democracy, our republic, needs to be addressed. But at the same time, people will rightfully ask, all right, what's the positive alternative vision for this country that will come from the Democratic Party, and when does that messaging process begin?
What should that vision be? What should the positive alternative message be?
You deal with the cards
Trump?
that are dealt. You deal with the situation at hand. I mean, right now we have a crisis of democracy. This guy, it's no longer the rule of law, it's the rule of Don. He's testing every theory. He's pushing boundaries that are unprecedented in U.S. history. By some estimates, a third of all the court decisions he's completely dismissed. He's an extortion racket as it relates to the universities, law firms, the media, what he's trying to do to all institutions that cultivate individual or independent thinking. And so it requires us to be clear and aggressive to call that out and address that obstacle. At the same time, as we move to pivot after November to the midterm elections and beyond, that gives the party the opportunity to really reestablish its why. Its purpose, what are its policies, what is it fighting for, what is it reconciling as it relates to the losses of the past, and how are we going to address those issues moving forward?
Well, Democrats in Washington believe they have found a winning issue in their battle over health care. The government shutdown, now the second longest in U.S. history. Democrats essentially saying any bill to reopen the government has to include an extension of health care subsidies, which are set to expire at the end of the year. Do you believe Democrats have picked the right fight?
Well, I'd say you're welcome to America. I mean, rural and red states that are disproportionately the beneficiaries of the Democrat stance. We're fighting for the people that voted not just for our party and our values and principles, but voted for Donald Trump and his party. We have their back. Donald Trump has betrayed them. He's turned their back. The Republicans in Congress have turned their back. So absolutely, your question, absolutely it's the right issue because it breaks through at a time of great economic anxiety. The idea that you're going to face a 1 to 3+100% increase in your premiums in a matter of months is the issue that defines more issues in more ways on more days for more Americans. So it's absolutely the right call.
And yet federal workers are suffering. The lines are getting longer outside of food banks. Some 5 million Californians stand to potentially lose food assistance.
Yeah.
What do you say to those 5 million Californians who are afraid their families are going to go hungry and they want Democrats to get together with Republicans and reopen the government?
I think it's a disgrace. The USDA's never done this in the past. They said they have a contingency fund for precisely this moment. They said just a few days ago on November 30th, rather September 30th, that the contingency fund exists for a moment like this, a likely government shutdown. So there's you're right, 5.5 million Americans that live in my home state that will be impacted by the decision, the choice by the Trump administration to cut this program during Thanksgiving. And those same people will face unprecedented prices for beef and coffee and other basic goods, just as they're facing unprecedented costs for candy, up 10.8% for Halloween. And what we will all experience is this war on Christmas and the cost of toys because of Trump's recklessness on this massive sales tax increase of working families and blue-collar workers called tariffs.
And yet, Governor, people are suffering. Are you concerned that at the end of the day, they're going to blame both parties equally and there will be a political price to pay for this fight that Democrats are
I don't think it's about who's to blame. It's not about who's up, who's down. It's about all of us. We're all better off and we're all better off. And you know what? I'm a little old-fashioned. I'm a governor. I've been an executive, mayor. You got to negotiate with the legislature. It's called a co-equal branch of government. You don't get to do always what you want, Mr. President. It means you have to work with Congress. And right now you have congressional leadership, Republican leadership, that is completely supine. They're appeasing this president. At least the Democrats are standing up for the people they represent in this republic and what they're asking for. Overwhelmingly, American people are asking for relief on health care costs. Donald Trump can simply provide that by negotiating in good faith. But let's establish some facts. Let's remember where we started. Donald Trump had no interest in meeting with the two leaders. And then he got pressure and decided to meet with them. But how did he meet with them? Not with meet the press in the room. He did it with 2028 Trump hats to troll the Republicans. He was never serious about a deal. He wanted this shutdown. And if you think I'm overstating it, why was he golfing over the weekend before the shutdown? Why has he been overseas the last week cleaning up his own mess as it relates to trade and tariff policies and not negotiating in good faith, knowing November 1st was around the corner? He's not serious. He doesn't want this shutdown to end. And that's what we're up against. And I think the American people understand that.
Let's talk about the battle that you are waging here in California over Prop 50. For people who are watching, this would enable a redistricting effort here in the state to add additional Democratic seats. It comes after Republicans in Texas moved to redistrict to add up to 5 additional Republican seats there at the direction of President Trump. Do you think that Prop 50 is going to pass on Tuesday, Governor?
I'm deeply confident, as long as we do everything that we've set out to do over the next few days. We don't believe in running the 90-yard dash. We run at peak the 110-yard dash. But the people have spoken. I mean, spoken so far in historic ways. It's a special election. We've seen unprecedented number of ballots already sent in. We have an all-mail-in ballot system here, and of course we have a big turnout we expect on Election Day. But we're seeing overwhelming understanding and recognition of what's at stake. And remember, it's Prop 50, because this impacts everyone watching in all 50 states. As I said a moment ago, Donald Trump is an historic president, historically unpopular. He's been very open and honest, including right outside the White House just last week, saying incumbents are likely to lose the midterms. That's why he called Greg Abbott. That's why he said he's, quote unquote, entitled. Think about that. Entitled to 5 seats. That's why he sent J.D. Vance to Indiana shortly thereafter. That's why he moved in Missouri. He moved the folks in North Carolina. And now we've got a special election in Indiana, or rather a special session, and likely movement in Florida. He is not screwing around. He's changing the rules. He's rigging the game because he knows he'll lose if all things are equal. He did not expect California to fight fire with fire. He expected us, as so often is the case, to try to argue for what's the right thing to do. He did not expect us to do what we did in unprecedented fashion, transparent, temporary, and democratic way. These are the first maps in U.S. history to go in front of the voters themselves. At the same time, we reaffirm our desire for national independent redistricting, no longer burdened by having one hand tied behind our back as this guy is cheating on the other side.
You have the support of many Democrats, including a lot of top Democrats, former President Barack Obama, and yet your predecessor, former Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, disagrees with this effort. He's been one of your most vocal critics.
I think that Prop 50 is a big scam. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it says that we should fight Trump and because he's a threat to democracy. But in the meantime, they want to go and tear up the Constitution in California, get rid of the independent commission that draws the district lines and take the power away from the people and give it back to the politicians.
What do you say to Governor Schwarzenegger, who says the fight for Prop 50 is just a big scam?
Well, former Republican Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's in all the Republican ads, is wrong on a number of points that he just made. First of all, we're not throwing out the independent redistricting. We're affirming national independent redistricting. We're maintaining our current independent redistricting for statewide races, but in response to what happened in Texas, temporarily changing the maps for 3 cycles for the congressional races. It reverts then back to its original form, number one. Number two, the people are deciding. The maps are in the ballot. They're there in front of the voters in a way that have never been done in California or American history. So it's temporary, it's transparent, we maintain the commission, and we're responding to the crisis, not of our making, but the crisis that Donald Trump advanced, Greg Abbott, and other Republicans that don't believe in fair and free elections. They don't. Why else would they be moving in this unprecedented way?
And yet even some Democrats have expressed concerns about the overall redistricting efforts. Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, who opposes redistricting, says, quote, if you fight fire with fire long enough, all you're going to have left is ashes. Does he have a point there?
Well, we're going to have ashes as it relates to the sort of core tenets of our founding fathers. We may not have a republic next year. We're going to celebrate 250 years of what? I mean, look, I talked about this supine Congress. We've lost a co-equal branch of government. Speaker Johnson has no interest in oversight. He doesn't believe in any foundational recognition or oversight of that as the founding fathers advanced it. You've got courts that are increasingly indulgent, particularly on the emergency docket with the Supreme Court. We can lose this thing. This guy's not screwing around. Trump is not screwing around. He sent masked men when we kicked off this campaign. What appears to be at least a secret police. It appears that these guys have sworn an oath of office to him, not the Constitution of the United States. He's federalized the National Guard, still in the state of California, not just in other parts of the country, through Election Day and beyond. One thing I like about Steve Bannon is he's honest. Steve Bannon was asked very clearly, ICE agents, masked agents around polling booths, is that a possibility? He said, damn right. I mean, he's saying the private thing out loud. These guys are not screwing around, and Donald Trump, of course, is now sent into a statewide election for a statewide constitutional amendment. He sent in the Department of Justice that are not needed and have no basis for coming in here, because this is all about a preview of 2026. And I assure you, what I said in June came true as it relates to the National Guard. It was a preview of things to come. Said the same thing with ICE. I can assure you you're going to see more of that around voter suppression, and you watch the abuse of this Department of Justice, which appears now to be his, not the American people.
We're going to unpack everything that you just said, but you mentioned 2026. And part of your redistricting fight is to give Democrats a better chance to take back the House in 2026. You've said if they can do that, then the Trump presidency is over. But the Trump presidency would last for another 2 years. So what exactly does that mean? How would the Trump presidency be over when he would still be in office?
It's over as we know it.
How?
Because we finally have restored a co-equal branch of government. They have subpoena power. They'll hold hearings. They can actually do something about congressionally approved appropriations that the President of the United States and Russ Vought can give a damn about and can decide where to go and move it. There'll be fire and fury, but it will signify substantially less because we'll finally have a co-equal branch of government. So the Trump presidency as we know it, from my perspective, will be over if we're successful in 2026. That's why Trump is trying. He understands the clock. He said that he's all but acknowledged this. This is not particularly revelatory. He understands what's at stake. He was on the receiving end of oversight in his first term. He knows what's coming, and that's why he wants to rig the game.
Is part of what you're saying that you would advocate for a third impeachment?
I'm not. I didn't say that at all. Quite the contrary. I advocate for oversight. I advocate for the rule of law, not the rule of Don. I advocate for the historic principles of our founding fathers, popular sovereignty, this notion of the rule of law and co-equal branches of government. I fundamentally believe in those principles. Donald Trump clearly does not.
Sticking with your fight against President Trump, he has been asked repeatedly about this idea of would he somehow try to seek a third term, despite the fact that it is barred by the Constitution. He's wavered in his answer, but in comments this week, he said, quote, "It's pretty clear I'm not allowed to run." Do you take President Trump at his word when he says that?
Where, have you gotten his tax returns he promised? I mean, can we go through the list? Come on. No, of course no one should. No one does. No one even supports him, Will. What he's doing, once a mind is stretched, it never goes back to its original form. He throws things out. He did this to me when I was in the Oval Office for 90 minutes with him. And he was joking about a fourth term because I looked behind me and there was FDR's portrait. And we're perfect little sheep. I understand that. I said this the other day and I really believe it. I mean, there's an old French poem that says he pisses on the grasshoppers to hear them sing. That's Donald Trump. He knows exactly. He's trolling people. At the same time, once that mind is stretched, it doesn't go back to the original form. Tommy Tuberville, a member of the United States Supreme Court, who seemed to have at least partially opened the door to this conversation. Steve Bannon, again, very honest, straightforward about what he hopes to see accomplished with the MAGA movement and with the Donald Trump presidency. So I don't put it past him. Here's the reason I'm not deeply anxious about it. I think his reign will be measured in years, not decades. For one thing, infirmity, time of life. He's getting older. He's slowing down. Physically, he's not the same person. I don't think this. My interactions with him really bear fruit to that claim. And so that's the only saving grace in this context. But free, fair elections, that's a whole separate conversation and how he can manipulate that outcome. And that's a different type of third term that we should watch.
Well, to that point, you've gone so far as to question whether the United States will have elections in 2028. What exactly are you basing that on? What would that look like?
When you send masked men, secret police, to the Democracy Center, when we kick off a campaign, that's in response to election rigging along the lines of the 12,000 votes he was looking for in Georgia, along the lines of the democracy he tried to wreck and light on fire after January 6th, along the lines of his own assertions, actions, and the fact that now he's federalizing and militarizing American streets with the United States military. I think he starts to stack these things up and it leaves a breadcrumb trail that should scare the hell out of everybody watching. I do not say this lightly. I don't believe he believes in fair and free elections. I don't. And I think people need to wake up to that and take this moment seriously. Good people can disagree, but I'm telling you, we've seen this. We've seen this act. I'm on the receiving end, California, of Donald Trump and his antics to a disproportionate degree of any other state. They are not screwing around.
Well, speaking of how he's using his authority, I do want to get your reaction to President Trump announcing that he plans to resume nuclear weapons testing for the first time in 30 years in the face of perceived threats by Russia and China. Do you think President Trump would actually use a nuclear weapon?
He doesn't even know. He said the Pentagon should do it. Wake up, Mr. President. I know he may have jet lag. It's the Department of Energy. He doesn't even know which agency is responsible for that. He may want to learn about computational capacity, the Department of Energy, to test this technology. It may want to look back in the record books, to your point, 1992, since the last time we did. Look, this is weakness masquerading in strength. This is classic Trump and Trumpism. This guy is historically weak. And these are acts of a weak person that is trying to appear strong. It has the form and substance of fog. You even heard representatives of the Trump administration tried to digest and explain this, and they couldn't even do it. So, look, I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. Watching the President of the United States in front of Xi, we're good. I mean, he was negotiating away this country in the first 5 minutes of the photo op. He came back with nothing. He got played by President Xi.
He says he got a good deal.
He said that. How many trade deals? 90 in 90 days? How many have you read and reviewed? How many have been signed? 0. His policy is press release. And the fact that you and I will be paying more for toys this Christmas, and we are already paying more for Halloween, bears truth to my assertion of the recklessness of his policies. He's wrecking this country. The jobs market is weak. Inflation is starting to creep back up. This is unprecedented to see in such a short period of time this kind of destruction to the progress we were experiencing that he inherited.
Just to go back to my question, though, do you think he would actually use a nuclear weapon, Governor?
No, it's interesting. I've had 1 or 2 private conversations with him where he actually calmed me a little bit talking about nuclear weapons. So I don't believe that. It's Rabel's. It's, again, he's trying to masquerade as a patriot, trying to masquerade. He's trying to overcompensate to be a tough guy. The only guy who's been doing this is Kim Jong-un. I mean, so the whole thing is, it's performative from my perspective. Then again, trust but verify that he doesn't begin to make some errant mistakes and we walk down a path of no return. It scares the hell out of me to start, talking about these kind of things. But hopefully cooler heads will prevail because, again, he didn't even know what he said and what he was talking about on the basis of what his own administration has said, he said, and talking about.
One of the biggest battles you're having with him is your fight over the deployment of U.S. troops to cities across this country, including here in California. Do you trust the Justice Department to handle these cases?
Absolutely not.
You don't trust the Justice Department?
Are you kidding? It's a personal
attorney. Do you trust
attorney.
the legal system?
I have confidence in the lower courts, and I'm holding hope that there's one co-equal branch of government left, and that's the judiciary. But again, not on the basis of the shadow docket in the U.S. Supreme Court, but the courts, the lower courts, the federal courts have held pretty strong. And so I'm hopeful it's the last institution standing. Again, he's assaulting all institutions that stand in his way. And obviously, I mentioned the 1/3 of the decisions that he appears to have dismissed. The courts are one of the most powerful and potent, so I'm hopeful, but I'm not naive. Posse comitatus, it's not complicated. You cannot use the United States military for domestic law enforcement. He just announced he will be sending out strike teams, and he'll be organizing in every state these strike teams. Wake up. What the hell do we need to tell people to get them off their couch to say, well, hold on. I may have liked his bluster. I may not have liked the last guy, but I didn't sign up for this.
You take me to my next question. What are you prepared as governor to do about those strike teams that are reported?
Well, we're doing everything in our power. We're using our moral authority. We're using our formal authority. Prop 50 is about formal authority. It's about something substantive. I'm trying to communicate differently. I'm trying to be more clear and concise in terms of my feelings about things, more accountable to this moment. At the same time, we're using the courts, back to your original question. I think it's 44 lawsuits in just 41 weeks of this administration. Not one we wanted to file, but we needed to file in response to this unprecedented assault. And by the way, we continue, including the Posse Comitatus case and other cases, we continue to win in lower court decisions. And we're waiting for the 7th Circuit, we're waiting for the 9th Circuit out here in Portland, out here in California, and we're waiting ultimately for where the Supreme Court lands on this question of federalization of the National Guard and militarization of American cities.
Let's talk about your relationship with President Trump. Back in 2023, you said on this broadcast, quote, by definition, you would need to work with President Trump if he were reelected.
Yep.
And you even hugged the president back in January when he came to visit in the wake of the wildfires here.
It wasn't much of a hug, but I appreciate that.
Okay. Have you now, Governor, given up on working with President Trump?
I've always have an open hand, not a closed fist. I revere the institution of the president. I revere that office. I'll pick up the phone if he called in a nanosecond. I will. I'll work with anyone that wants to work in a constructive manner. That's why I went out to the tarmac, as you refer. That's why I went to the White House and the Oval Office. I think I was the first Democratic governor to do that. That's why I worked with this president in Trump 1.0 as it relates to COVID as well or better than most Democratic governors. I don't seek to put sand in his gears, but I do seek to stand tall on principle and push back against overreach and against an assault on institutions and people that are feeling fearful, communities that are on edge. And I represent a state, the most diverse state in the world's most diverse democracy, and there's no state that's been more impacted by his assault, racially profiling people, going out streets, literally disappearing people that are walking their dogs or going to school.
When's the last time you spoke with President
It's been a few months.
What was that
It was after he
conversation?
federalized the National Guard, after we had a 16 or 19-minute conversation where he didn't even bring it up and then lied about it the next day. 4,000 members of my National Guard were federalized. 700 active duty Marines were not sent overseas, were sent to the second largest city in the United States of America. Hundreds are still sitting there. $100+ million of taxpayer money wasted for nothing but pageantry. This is what we're up against, and I hope, again, people are clear about the stakes.
You have been one of the most outspoken Democratic voices against President Trump, and part of your tactic is to imitate some of what we see online from President Trump. So you mimic his all-cap posts, you send out similar memes. Do you run the risk of normalizing that behavior?
Quite the contrary. The whole expression was to not allow it to be normalized. It was becoming normalized. All this, the normalization of deviancy across the spectrum of issues. But his communication, he's dressing up as the Pope, as Superman. Hold on, he's putting his face on Mount Rushmore. He's saying, thank you. It's madness. And so I put a mirror up to that madness. And the wonderful thing about it is folks in different networks, they were appalled. A young man, the governor out there, should wash his mouth out with soap. His wife needs to intervene. Well, where the hell have you been? About the President of the United States who's acting like a child. So exactly the opposite. The reason I'm doing that is to put this mirror up.
It reminds me of something Michelle Obama said once. When they go low, we go high. Is there still room for that mindset?
I would love to go back to that, but politics have changed. The world's changed. The rules of the game have changed. Now we have to rewrite the new rules. I'm trying to iterate. I'm in that process of doing that. But Michelle Obama also recently was interviewed about that comment, and she amended that comment. About going high is also going strategic, meaning finding strategies to address concerns and anxieties. So She's evolved on her own foundational principle, but it's the right one. We're all better off, and we're all better off. This can't continue forever. All of us living in the state of fear and anxiety, on edge. And so, of course, we want to go back to some semblance of normalcy. But you have to deal with the crisis at hand. It's just been 10, 11 months of this presidency. We have 3 more years. Time to batten down the hatches, and it's time for us to change if we want things to change. And that's why our communication strategy has shifted. That's why Prop 50 is shifted the conversation here in California, and I think will shift the debate going into 2026 as a consequence of our success. And I think we, as a party, have become more unified, and I think more aligned on what's at stake.
I want to talk to you about the polarization, that very issue in this country, because you have reached across the aisle. In fact, in your first episode of your podcast, you invited conservative activist Charlie Kirk to join you for a conversation. He was, of course, assassinated in September. Why did you want to speak to Charlie Kirk?
Because success leaves clues. He was organizing on the campuses. He was successful at getting out the vote. He has a voice, a huge voice, an outsized voice in the MAGA movement. And I talked to Democratic friends and allies, and they weren't familiar with him. And I asked about, well, what exists in the Democratic Party? What are we doing about it? He was, to his credit, kind enough to fly out and sit down with me. We talked about our wives. We talked about our kids. We talked about the future of this country, vehemently different points of view. I mean, it's like daylight and darkness in terms of the contrasting component. We stayed in touch a little bit. And I just think that's healthy. And I know people, some folks on my party were offended by it. You've platformed him. I had 0 downloads on my podcast. So who platformed who? But I did the same with Bannon. I did the same thing with Newt Gingrich, who helped lead my recall campaign. I've done that with Sean Spicer. I have people on the other side, because at the end of the day, divorce is not an option. And everyone wants to be loved. Everyone needs to be loved. All of us need to be protected, respected, connected. And if we can find that, we can find our way out of this. So I think it's important, as we're going back and forth and we're holding the line, we're drawing new lines, we're standing tall and firm on our values, that we also find ways, pathways back to a semblance of commonwealth, of commonality, of humanity. And that's what that represents.
Well, part of this and part of the backdrop to this is an increase in political violence, targeting Republicans, targeting Democrats. What role do leaders like yourself have in turning down the temperature?
We got to call that out. It sickens you to your core. I mean, talk about weakness. I mean, violence solves for nothing. And so it just needs to be called out, period, full stop, not exploited by anybody. Forget politics here. How can anybody condone violent acts? And those I remember getting a call from my son after Charlie was shot, and he asked me as if I would know, did he die? And full disclosure, I sent a text to him, wishing for his recovery. Little did I know. I'm rather humiliated. I haven't shared that. As a human being, my son is not a fan of his, but knew of him, and it impacted him. And he was on a speakerphone. He's a young kid at school. It impacted a lot of folks. And I think about my son at that moment. I think that's something he'll never forget. His generation won't forget. So this is God bless. I literally pray for him. And little did I know, he probably had already passed away. And so grace, when President Trump was shot, unconscionable, unacceptable, called it out with clarity and conviction. I didn't like on the other side with respect, and this is not other sideism, but there was not that same kind of humanity that was expressed when Paul Pelosi was attacked. There was a lot of, sort of mockery around that. And there's certainly mockery from the left about Charlie Kirk, which was wrong. So all of that needs to be called out. Or again, we're all in this together. And so I think, again, we can go back and forth. That's why I say open hand, not a closed fist. The President of the United States calls him and answer the call. And respect the office, even if I disagree fundamentally with the individual in that office.
You've been very forceful about calling out the violence, the rhetoric. Do you ever grow concerned that engaging in any type of heated rhetoric, when you talk about fighting fire with fire, that could undercut efforts to try to bring people together in this moment.
Yeah, look, I mean, look, you got to deal with the cards that are dealt. And the reality is we have to be firm and we have to assert ourselves at peril we lose this republic. We'll lose our democracy. I really believe that. And so we have to be clear. We have to be precise. We have to be, I think, more surgical in terms of our approach. I think narrative matters. And to the extent that we have to elevate with clarity and conviction some of that rhetoric, we can do so cautiously, but I think strategically. But I get your point. I understand that deeper point. But the other side, Donald Trump would like nothing more than for all of us to step down. And then maybe I can hold a candlelight vigil, say, boy, it's just so unfair that Donald Trump is out there rigging the next election. He's in 6 states, and now he's got a 16, 17 vote margin. And, you know, boy, gosh darn, you know, I really wish he was better. And maybe I'd get an op-ed in the Washington Post, and everyone would sit there and say, boy, you were really right. Meanwhile, this guy's consolidating power. And again, I really believe we may not have another free and fair election if we don't wake up to that.
Let's talk a little bit about your future, the future of the Democratic Party. You have been very clear that, yes, you are considering a potential run for president in 2028. I think it's fair to say that anyone who decides to run in 2028, including former President Biden's surrogates, are going to have to answer questions about what they did and what they said in 2024 around President Biden's presidency. You stood by him till the end after that disastrous debate performance, even when top Democrats were calling for him to step down. Did you ever have concerns, Governor, about his capacity
I go home
to
with the one
serve another 4 years?
No, I never had that direct. I just talked to the president a few hours ago. I've been privileged to have a relationship with the president. I spent almost 2 hours with him in December, right before, during the transition in the Oval Office. And my experience, his expression, gave me no pause, no doubt. Let me finish. I was proud to stand there, proud to make the case for 15.4 million jobs, proud to make the case for the CHIPS and Science Act, the industrial policy that was worker-centered, proud to make the case for an infrastructure package that actually delivered a real bill and is delivering real jobs all across this country. Proud to stand tall as he was a counter prevailing point to President Xi and what they're doing in low carbon green growth and how they're going to dominate the future as it relates to green energy. And he was a counter prevailing point. I was proud of the fact that he supported 400 bipartisan bills. It did more for vets and has started to address the issue of gun violence. I was proud of that legislative package of accomplishments. The one exception as it relates to the interaction I had with him that gave me pause, one, was the fundraiser in Southern California. And all of us were a little taken aback, but we also were mindful that he had been to Europe twice in about a week, and for the grace of God, go any of us with jet lag and being exhausted. That person came back on that debate night, and that certainly gave all of us pause.
If it gave you pause after the debate, why didn't you sound the alarm then?
I did privately, with grace and humility. He was going to make the right decision. And so for me, it wasn't my job to go out there. My job was to let him, give him the space. I just have a different, good people can disagree. I have a different approach to all of this. And I lost my father. I lost him right around election for governor. He survived just to see me elected. So many of the attributes of my father, I remember. He reminds me so much. I'll be candid with you. This is me speaking as a human being. Reminds me of Joe Biden. I wasn't going to do that to him. He was going to make the right decision, and he did. Question is the timing, okay. But the bottom line, I was proud and continue to be proud to make a case for his record, and certainly in contrast to the record of this president.
Governor, did you legitimately believe that he was capable of serving as president until January of 2029?
Yeah, I think my focus was frankly situational. It was making sure Donald Trump didn't get back into office to experience everything that we're experiencing today. And there was no interaction I had that suggested otherwise.
What do you say to Americans who feel misled by you and other top
misled in what
Democrats
respect? He decided to step
about the
down.
mental acuity of President Biden, that they wish you'd sounded the alarm sooner to give way for
I never
an
experienced.
open
Look,
convention?
I'm not going to substitute myself for someone else or for popular opinion. I'm going to express my relationship to my truth with the former President of the United States, including at the end of his term, quite literally, in December, which was a masterclass of foreign policy and domestic policy, which I will never forget as we walk through not just the election, but we're walking through the world we're living in. There was nothing to suggest what you just said or others have suggested in terms of my interaction. That's all I can be accountable for.
Let's talk about former Vice President Kamala Harris. She says she lost because she only had 107 days to run, among some other factors. In your view, why do you think she lost the 2024 race?
It's a deeper forensic. I think I'm up to 26 pages of other people's opinions on it. I'm not even making that up. By the way, it's, I think, actually 24, to be fair. Let me not overstate it. And there's all kinds of theories. I mean, we can go, you want to go through the list? We'll need an extra hour.
What do you think was at the top of the list?
I don't know. I'm reflecting on it. I think time will have a more of an understanding. We can start with inflation. We can talk with interest rates. We don't talk about interest rates enough. We can talk about incumbency. We can talk about Israel. We can talk about immigration and the border. We can go through a myriad of lists. We can talk about Joe Rogan. We can talk about woke. We can talk about the 107 days. We can talk about the lack of an open primary. We can talk about The View. Again, I'm on page 6 of the 24 pages. And how you unpack that, how you stack that in terms of everything, I think needs still a little bit more forensics, a little more analysis.
Do you think if former President Biden had stayed in the race, given that you did stay with him till virtually the end, do you think he could have won?
I think the prevailing winds there were a lot of headwinds. And people were looking for something fundamentally different. They were looking for change. I think the inflation scars were real. I think if I think about my own surrogacy, you know, I talked about the aggregate a lot. I talked about the economy that was booming. It was the best economy since the 1960s, the lowest black unemployment, lowest unemployment for women, lowest unemployment for people with disabilities, the lowest uninsured rate in American history. We had cut child poverty in half. That all happened during the Biden-Harris administration. I was making those points. I was making the point around GDP. I was making the point that inflation was cooling after the inflation scars at 9.1 and moving in the right direction. I was making the point around the American experience in the aggregate, not what American people were experiencing. And I think that was a legit disconnect in terms of the campaign, our communication, and others that would have made it a very challenging election.
In her book, the former vice president writes that she scrambled to reach prominent Democrats hours after President Biden exited the race. And she said that you responded to her call, quote, by saying, Gavin Newsom hiking will call back. He never did. Is that what happened?
100%. And I sent out an endorsement in a few minutes after that. That was one of her first endorsements. The reason she was calling. I've known Kamala all my life. The last person she needs to reach out to is me. So I learned the news. I wanted to get in touch with the Biden folks. I was out on an actual hike. And I said, I was like, Kamala, you got 1 million people to call. And we were literally working as she reached out. It was a voicemail, by the way, unknown number for the record. And as she was on to her next calls, we were already on to our press release endorsing her. So I don't even know why that was even in the book.
Did you feel like she took a swipe at you in her book?
It's all good. We've known each other for 20 years, and I think it's familiarity. I think she was having a little fun.
So no hard feelings.
Oh my
that
God,
she wrote
just the
that.
opposite. Give me a break.
You've said, as we've discussed, you are considering a run for president, and you've said you'll make a decision about whether to run for president after the midterms.
Yeah, I mean,
Governor, let me ask you, why do you want to be president?
I don't. I'm not suggesting I am. I'm saying, in response to someone talked about it, and I hate when nothing I dislike more than the politician that sits there and lies to you. And we all just sit there rolling our eyes going, give me a break. So as it relates to that, there's nothing on the right. I'm focused on Prop 50. I'm focusing on fair and free elections. And to the extent fate, the future, there's an alignment, you have a big enough why, you have a what and a how, You meet a moment, and that moment presents itself in a year, year and a half. We'll see what happens.
Understood. But if you're thinking about it, that why must be forming.
No.
Well, if you decide to run, why would you want to do it?
Well, I haven't decided, and I appreciate the persistence as it relates to this, and I respect it. I think whoever runs, and this is just my objective belief, subjective, but I hope it's objective for a lot of Americans. It reminds me a little of Isaiah. You need to be a repairer of the breach, spiritually and physically. But it's not just about restoration, the forces of restoration, it's also forces of transformation. And what I mean by that is, what are the trend lines that define the future? You know, we're in the future business. I'm here in California. Future happens here first, where America's coming attraction on artificial intelligence, fusion, quantum, robotics, nuclear, space. California dominates in every critical category. I worry about the future work. I worry about the announcement from Amazon. I worry about earnings going up, profits skyrocketing, and headcount going down, meaning less and less people having access and opportunities. I think whoever runs has to paint a vision for the future, a journey that we can be on together that's not just about growth, but about inclusion. Issues of debt and entitlement, issues around energy, and I still believe in climate issues. All those issues need to be front and center eventually for whoever is the nominee of our party.
Do you see yourself as a moderate or a progressive, Governor?
Oh, I've always saw myself as a pragmatist, a hard-headed pragmatist who balances budgets, doesn't begrudge other people's success, is pro-aspiration, less redistribution, more pre-distribution in terms of addressing the issues of ignorance, poverty, and disease by beginning at the beginning. Our interventions come too late on poverty. That's why we did preschool for all. That's why we're doing after school for all, summer school for all. That's why we've done some of these nation-leading programs, including, by the way, $11 insulin recently. All of those are sort of part and parcel of my value set. But in terms of my policies, hard-headed pragmatism. I'm a small business person, after all. I started a small company right out of college. One part-time employee, grew it to about 1,000 people, 23 little businesses. Not trying to impress you or anyone watching, but I have an entrepreneurial mindset, desire to iterate. And so that's the mindset I try to bring in the work I do.
You've talked about a lot of issues that you care about. Every president has their signature issue. For former President Obama, it was healthcare. For former President Biden, it was infrastructure. As you think about a potential run, what is your top issue? What's your top issue? I
appreciate it. Now we're on the extra innings of persistence. Look, as I said, I'm going to revert back to this notion that quite literally I'm focused on the next couple of days, running the 110-yard dash on Prop 50. And then most importantly, I mean this sincerely, the whole thing, everything, is about winning back the House of Representatives. This is it. This was the warm-up. This was Act 1. I think we have tremendous momentum coming later in this week. Democrats are going to be back on their toes. You're going to be writing all those stories about these two outstanding governors, this dynamic young mayor, what happened in Prop 50, what it means, what it doesn't mean. But one thing it does mean, Democrats are back. Momentum, direction, and we're going to take that momentum. We're going to win back the House of Representatives. That's all that matters. Focus on the essential. That is the essential.
Governor Gavin Newsom, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Really appreciate the conversation.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.